Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange, and thank you so very much for joining us once again. Well, some ups and downs this week for Governor Scott Walker. He gives his State of the State address on the same day a new poll is released showing that he could pretty much beat any of his potential Democratic challengers in a head-to-head competition. And then two more of his former staffers get charged with doing campaign work on the taxpayer dime when he was Milwaukee County Executive. We'll talk about a new report that shows Milwaukee has one of the worst employment rates for black males in the entire country. And we'll talk about whether Aurora Healthcare has a duty, a responsibility to keep Sinai Hospital open in downtown Milwaukee, even though it loses millions of dollars every single year. And lastly, we'll talk about this huge contract that Prince Fielder got from Detroit. All right, let me introduce everybody. We again have newspaper columnist Joel McNally, Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. And you know Denise Callaway, the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System.
Yeah, we know Denise.
Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, first let's talk about Scott Walker. He's in the news as always. Two more former staffers get charged with doing campaign work on county time when he was county executive. Walker says he repeatedly told all employees that that was not allowed and that he himself did nothing wrong. You wonder if the seemingly never-ending negative publicity has really had that much of an effect on Walker's reputation. A new poll this week shows he could beat any of the Democrats they're talking about putting up against him. Kevin, do you think that's going to improve, or is that going to narrow as they do more polls?
I think what's happening now is that people are beginning to see, after that tumultuous year last year of yelling and screaming and banging of drums and protesting, that the world did not come to an end, the sky wasn't falling, and things are not as bad as predicted. They're actually pretty good, which the governor was right to point out during his State of the State address. It was appropriate to send the message that we are turning the tide. We have eliminated a huge $3.6 billion deficit without raising taxes. We bolstered our Medicaid by $1.2 billion. There have not been massive public layoffs that you're seeing in Illinois and New York and California. There haven't been tax increases. In fact, property taxes have gone down. So I think as you get closer to a recall election and some of that fervor of last year begins to subside, you may see him start to pull away. His war chest is building. You have Democrats who are, I think there's a tug of war, not only in the state but nationally for dollars. There was an interesting article in The Hill this week that the Obama camp and also the Democrats who want to see their party win the Herb Kohl seat are not all that thrilled that all this recall attention is going to soak up recall dollars. So I think things at this point look pretty good for Scott Walker.
Denise, do you think there's a possibility that maybe there is a silent majority out there that really does like Walker?
That's possible. You know, anything is possible. But I think, I always hate to disagree with Kevin.
No, you don't.
But for Kevin to say things are going pretty good, I think doesn't look at the fact that we've had 6 straight months of job loss. The story that you mentioned earlier, where Milwaukee has one of the highest unemployment rates for African-American men in the country, things are not going pretty good for a number of people. And I think some of those are folks who did sign the recall petitions. Some of them are folks who didn't sign the recall petitions and haven't made their voices heard yet. But I think that the challenge that Governor Walker has is these pieces that keep coming out about misconduct by key staff members. That does begin over a period of time to begin to cause people to say, well, what is going on? What was happening? Is something still happening? I mean, when you've got a secret internet network so you all can communicate amongst each other about what's happening with the political work for the governor, including for his gubernatorial campaign, that was being done on county time, that causes people who might be in the middle, and there are people in the middle, those independents or undecideds, to wonder, what is going on here? And, the governor made some comments today that I think made it very clear from his part that he said he didn't know this was going on. But you look at the quote that was in the Journal-Sentinel today, where he talked about the fact that we can't have another story on this. We can't afford another story. All of these things that he listed needed to stop. Perhaps that was just the part of the email that they pulled, but he didn't say if this is going on, it's illegal and I want these people fired. His concern was not the legality, at least in that email. His concern was another story about it.
Is it possible that the Journal-Sentinel cares a tremendous amount about this story, but that the general public will say, so what? He had staff members when he was Milwaukee County executive working on his campaign. Big deal.
Working on a lieutenant governor candidate's campaign.
Yeah, you know, and his campaign.
No,
And his.
not what they've been charged with.
Be quiet a minute, Kevin.
Well, let's be clear here.
You don't interrupt me with things that aren't true, please. Now,
I want to respond
if
when he's
I
done.
can speak, if Kevin will allow me to. There's a whole bunch of things going on here. First of all, do you remember, and I think Kevin should because he was part of it, the caucus scandal in Madison?
Now I really want to respond.
That brought down the leaders of both the Democratic leadership in the legislature and the Republican leadership. Criminal charges against 5 leaders in both parties and a number of aides. Kevin managed to escape that, but he was part of the caucus that was in the middle of all that. This was the biggest political scandal in Wisconsin history, and it took place while Scott Walker was in the legislature, but he wasn't touched by it. Now, in his office, the same thing is going on, and I think Denise brought up the really important part of this, that in the county executive's office, they had set up a secret email system that was removed from county governments so that they could conduct illegal activities. And the quote that Denise mentioned, which was Scott Walker to his then Deputy Chief of Staff, Tim Russell, or perhaps he was Chief of Staff then, I forget which, Tim Russell, he said, this got in the paper, we can't have these stories getting out, stop using the private laptops. That's pretty much what he said. He acknowledged that he knew this secret system was going on and that he was part of it. Yeah, that's a big story, and I think much more is going to come out of that story, including the destruction of evidence. That's blatantly illegal, and that's the next. I don't know how many feet this particular scandal has, but that's the next shoe to fall. They destroyed evidence in that office.
How about
now let
a
me
quick
say
response,
something
though.
about the poll. That poll that you said had him beating every challenger. I did polling. There was an enormous margin of error in that poll, much bigger than any of the polls we read about. And that's why this poll was very different than all of the other polls that have been conducted about Walker's approval and Walker against other candidates, including by the Bradley Center, the most conservative, foundation you can imagine, had funded polls that said his approval rating was much farther down than that. That poll was not credible. That poll actually said that women in Wisconsin like Newt Gingrich better than men. That's how credible that poll was.
How about a quick response?
It's been referenced here a couple of times that someone in a staffer, Kelly Reinfleisch, was working on the governor's campaign. That's not true. That was a misstatement a couple of times here on television. She is charged with working on a different lieutenant governor candidate, Brett Davis. They've been going after Scott Walker and this John Doe for over a year now. He has cooperated for over a year and says if they want to sit down and talk with him, he'll be glad to be interviewed. And this is all they have been able to come up with, that somebody has been campaigning.
It's against the law.
It is against the law. It is against the law. It's wrong. One of the persons charged here should have known better, having been through that caucus scandal. But none of this is sticking to Scott Walker. His vindictive detractors wanted to, but so far none of this is sticking to Governor Walker.
Stealing money from veterans.
I think the
topic.
question becomes,
A UWM study released this week shows that less than 45% of Milwaukee's black males between the ages of 16 and 64 are even employed. The authors say the only cities that are worse are Buffalo and Detroit. Isn't this kind of what the status quo has been around here for years and years and years? And what can be done, Denise, that hasn't already been tried? These studies come out over and over and over again.
And there is no outrage any place at all except in the African American community. It's one story that comes out every year when this particular survey is done, and there's no outrage about it. There's no effort on the part of community leaders to address it. There's no effort on the part of political leaders to address it. It goes on for years after year after year because we as a community allow it to go on. That's the reason that it happens. That's as much as the outrage as the unemployment rate that we're taking a look at. Now, some people can question whether or not you should be counting 16-year-olds in that particular survey. You take the 16-year-olds out, are we saying then we're really happy because the rate's only 39% or 38%? We have a problem in this community that really is caused by so many jobs leaving the central city area. That's one piece of it. So it makes it much more difficult for people to get out. We also have a problem because we have a number of particularly young African American males who've had their driver's license privileges revoked, who have accumulated these fines that are very difficult for them to pay off. So it makes it even more difficult for them to get to jobs that are in suburban communities. If we as a community decide that this is not something that demands attention and that demands action, we're going to be sitting here next year with the same kind of statistics. And that's not the sad part. The sad part is, I don't care whether they're African American, Latino, Asian, or Caucasian. If you have a community where you have that many people out of work, it hurts your ability as a city to reach your fullest economic potential. And if we don't start to realize that and address it from that point of view, then we're going to be sitting back here a year from now, and Milwaukee is going to again be at the top of one of those lists that you want to be at the bottom of, and this community will not have realized its full economic growth because we haven't engaged all the people in it.
What can we do that hasn't been done and hasn't been talked about last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Well, since we've done nothing, what do you mean, what do we do with it? Like we haven't tried anything. Denise, it was right about what she said, but she didn't go quite far enough. Another enormous factor in why black males cannot be employed and are not employed in this community is the racial disparity in the incarceration system in this state. The racial disparity between whites and blacks who commit the same crimes, and whites don't go to prison and blacks do, is the greatest in the state of Wisconsin of any state in the union. That's according to the Sentencing Project, which studies all this across the country. And the fact that we let that enormous racial disparity in the incarceration system, then we implant that on our employment system, because when these people return to the community, they simply cannot get jobs. And there are Republicans in the legislature right now that want to make it worse. Joel Clayfish, the husband of the lieutenant governor, has actually introduced a bill to remove what is state law now, that employers are not supposed to discriminate against someone with a criminal record. There are certain jobs that they allow them to discriminate under the law, but if the job is not related to the crime that you were convicted of a long time ago and that you served your sentence for, employers are not supposed to discriminate. Joel Clayfish actually wants to make it legal to discriminate against anyone with a criminal record. Why would we want to not employ people returning from the prison system, these African Americans who, are suffering through the enormous incarceration disparities? Then they come back and Republicans want to make it legal not to even give them a job. That is insane, because that means they only can make money illegally. They can't make money through a decent job.
Liberals have been in charge, conservatives have been in charge. There's an ebb and flow. It still is never addressed.
Here's what I think needs to happen. Black males have to go to school, stay in school.
In fact, they can't get scholarships to go to school either.
Well, but they need to go to school, stay there, and finish. And then we need to create jobs, good paying jobs. And business people will tell you that there are jobs available, but the people who are looking for jobs and who are applying for jobs don't have the necessary skills to fill those jobs. So I think it's incumbent upon the business community to make an outreach to private and public schools to steer their students to the occupations where the jobs are. Also, I think it's a cultural matter too. We can't continue to use race as an excuse. Liberals are wrong to say that black males would be better off if there would be less racial discrimination. Conservatives are wrong when they say that black males would necessarily do better if there was less government intervention. Let's not play the race card. Let's not play the victim card, because all that does is create a sense of hopelessness among black males that they can't when we know that they really can't.
The only reason it creates a sense of hopelessness is because we talk about these numbers and we do nothing about it. That's where there's a sense.
Well, I think you're right. We get this study, we talk about it for less than a week, and then it goes into a drawer somewhere, and then it's forgotten.
All right, next topic. There's been a lot of talk the past few weeks about Aurora Healthcare's Sinai Hospital in downtown Milwaukee. Caters a lot to poor people and loses millions of dollars every single year. Now, Aurora is a business. Does it have a responsibility to keep a hospital open that isn't making any money? Do they have a responsibility, even though they have another hospital, St. Luke's on the south side, that makes all this money doing all the heart surgery? Does that make it their responsibility to keep a hospital open in the central city that isn't making any money?
You say it's a business. It's also a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that gets tax advantages and all kinds of things as being operated as a nonprofit organization. But now they say, well, if we're not going to make profits, we're not going to be there. We're not going to serve health care to those people. Meanwhile, they'll spend $500 million to build new hospitals out in the exurbs of Mequon or in between here and Madison, where there's already hospitals, but they want to actually compete for, more lucrative business out there than doing the health care business of the inner city, which we know is paid by Medicaid or Badger Care. And we now have a governor in this state who is throwing people off of Badger Care. So, of course, it makes it more difficult if those are your businesses that are only going to be funded by Medicaid or Badger Care, and you have an anti-poor, attitude from the government to just kick people off of having their health care paid for. Yeah, that's going to be hard. But also, Sinai-Samaritan moves some of their more lucrative operations, including orthopedics and heart, which is one of the higher profit margin services of a hospital, out of Sinai-Samaritan. So you say some of those other hospitals are making bigger profits. Yeah, it's because they moved the profitable services out of that hospital into some of their other hospitals.
But Denise, if I'm a wealthier person who has insurance and I'm a heart patient at St. Luke's, is it my responsibility? Should I be charged more money to make up for all the money that Aurora is losing at Sinai-Samaritan for people who can't afford insurance and can't afford their operations?
Well, I think the bigger question is what responsibility do we have as a community to people who we want to include in the community, who we need to be healthy in order for our community and for our economy to grow, and there's no accessible health care. Aurora is the only hospital that's really left in the central part of the city. That's it. Children's left a long time ago. So as we take a look at what kind of opportunities there are for people to access health care, I mean, that's the key issue. Their choices that people have are extremely limited. So it's not necessarily my responsibility in terms as it relates to business to support people who don't have insurance, but I think I have a moral obligation, particularly when I know that the hospital is making money off of my insurance company for the fees that it charges me. I think there is a moral obligation to make sure that we don't create a desert of health care for people who live in the central city. We have to figure out ways, and maybe some of this will come with the Americans for the Health Care Act. That's
Affordable Care.
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act that's coming up. That will help to alleviate some of the stress that they're feeling. But the problem is not that they're poor people, and it's not where rich people are going. The problem is we have not figured out in this country a way to make health care affordable enough for people, so some of those people who are uninsured have the ability to have insurance, and they're not in the dilemma that they're in right now.
Aurora has been pretty open and seemingly pretty honest about their situation. They said, okay, we're not going to close the hospital, but we do have to address this situation because we can't, as an organization, continue to lose all this money every year because people think we should.
The current situation gripping Aurora is unsustainable. They have been a tremendous corporate citizen all across the state of Wisconsin, providing all kinds of services for the uninsured and the underinsured, including a free clinic on the near south side, and all kinds of free services at 3 community-based sites here in the Milwaukee area. However, because of the bad economy and because of a dramatic decrease in reimbursements, they are in this horrible economic condition now where they have lost, over the past 10 years, $107 million. They can't continue to operate the way they are going right now. Otherwise, they would, unfortunately, have to be forced to shutter everything down, and give them a lot of credit for not doing that. They are very open about saying that they are not going to close down. However, trying to find a clinically sound and financially sound model for success is going to take some time, and they say they will have one by the end of the year. I take them at their word, but what they can't look at their ER at Sinai-Samaritan alone. When you are treating over 25,000 patients in the ER that do not have an emergency, that you can't continue to do that.
But it's not,
they're hemorrhaging money.
Right. It's not just Aurora's problem. I mean, in some ways, and I don't mean this in a bad way, they get stuck because they're the last hospital downtown and close to the central city. Again, it goes back to, as a community, how do we figure this out so we don't have people in crisis situations and they're using the ER like it's the doctor?
And when they say that it's going to take them a whole year to figure it out, initially you go, what? Come on, we can't wait that long. But it's not easy because you have to balance what you can provide and what you can afford.
Yeah, they're going to take a year to break it to us what they're going to do.
We have to take 1 minute, and we have 1 minute to talk about Prince Fielder getting a 9-year, $214 million contract from Detroit, the 4th richest contract in the history of baseball. Is he worth it?
I don't know. I'm thinking maybe he needs to talk to Aurora to see how he might be able to help Aurora out. Maybe we can have the Prince Fielder wing.
He's the best. He's the best player I saw in Milwaukee.
I mean, he's just fabulous, and we might argue that all of these salaries are overinflated, but I think he's worth every penny.
9 years from now, is he going to be worth $20 million?
It's hard to say, but he's got the alternative of being a designated hitter in the American League. So yeah, I think he's still going to be worth it.
Will he take them to the World Series?
Well, that's a pretty good team without him. With him, they've got a chance. But he's lucky he signed with the American League team. He's not the 4th best player in baseball. I'm sorry. A 9-year contract, 2 or 3 years now, he won't even be able to take the field because he may not be in shape.
He's also a good guy.
All right. Well,
not $214 million.
There's not much debate about whether the Brewers could have re-signed Prince Fielder, but there's been plenty of debate about debates. The presidential debates, that is. Those GOP gatherings are down to 4 contenders now, plus the people asking the questions. And the one other group that's been particularly important to one particular candidate. Here's writing consultant and commentator Rick Horowitz to explain. Rick?
Newt loves Hooters. And not just Hooters. He also loves shouters and cheerers and jeerers and clappers. And Newt loves playing to the crowd, getting them pumped up, riled up. He likes it so much, he needs it so much, that this week he even threatened not to show up for any debate that wouldn't let his supporters express themselves however they wanted, whenever they wanted. You can understand why he'd feel that way, can't you? The Newt show without a crowd is like a piano player without a keyboard, like Molotov without his cocktail. I mean, what's the point of pushing all those hot rhetorical buttons if folks aren't allowed to burst into flames every time you do it? Newt, Newt, Newt. Has there been anyone in our lifetimes so determined to push so many hot buttons, or so aware of how useful the right word can be to win an argument or smear an opponent? I can't think of anyone. Then again, I'm not an historian. But Newt Gingrich has been doing it for decades. It was way back in the 90s. Remember when his political action group, GoPac, put out that famous, well, infamous memo spreading the word about throwing the mud. Language, a key mechanism of control, that was the title. And it gave Republican candidates and office holders a list of words to use in speeches and on the campaign trail. 2 lists, actually. There was the list of optimistic, positive governing words to describe their own campaign and their own vision. Words like caring and freedom and citizen and strength. And then there was the other list. The list Newt called contrasting words to use on your opponent. Words like betray and bizarre, like welfare and greed, like pathetic and radical and bosses and traitors and shame. That was years ago, but it could have been yesterday, right? There are people all around us still making a living off that list. Gingrich is simply the most shameless. So when he calls Mitt Romney grotesquely hypocritical, or Barack Obama the food stamp president, or some debate moderator despicable, he's being perfectly consistent. That's the way he operates. Slugs leave a trail of slime behind them, and so do newts.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm and enjoy the rest of your weekend.